Leia, I don't know. It's just not working, Tom exhaled, as he lay back on the couch and looked around the room. Phyllis and Hagar had gone to bed, but Della was still asleep on the chair, where she'd been the last hour. I've tried talking to Zinshiki, but I'm just not getting through to her. It's like we're speaking the same language, but there's a double meaning in Pezrin. Whatever I say, she hears something else. You're joking. Shalea sat next to him on the couch as they watched twilight fall over the ocean. He felt her shake her head. Tom, that's a bit ironic coming from you. Ironic? The girl wants to eat me. Tom felt his world spin slightly and looked at her. Even putting that aside, she's obsessive, stubborn, and single-minded to the point of being obstinate. You should have heard her at the faculty party. No wonder you like her, Leia smiled innocently, though he could see her fear underneath. Even so, he wasn't sure she was teasing. Anyway, aren't human teenagers supposed to be like that? Don't believe everything you see in videos. Tom bristled slightly, but thought about his daughter. All right. It's a little honest. Well, I didn't see her, Leia nodded. But what I'm hearing from you is that she's a very angry and defensive young woman. I see that a lot in my school, maybe more than you'd imagine. That makes people dangerous. I'll take your word for it, Tom said after a moment. Miv had described Leia's work in one of the poorest sections of the capital, but he didn't have any scope to understand it. No matter how luck had let him fall into it, he knew that teaching at the academy was a position of privilege. Until now, he hadn't begun to appreciate the depth of it. Besides, Leia sniffed decisively, I think you understand her feelings better than you think. Feelings? That's almost a contradiction here. Tom shook his head again. Her whole life seems to operate around their customs. They live by these unwritten rules, and they aren't telling anyone else what they are. So how can understanding her feelings help? It doesn't. At least not in the teaching or the administration of education. But Tom, in reaching other minds, it means everything. Without feelings and passion, there wouldn't be change. Without change, there's no reason you or she would even be here. Leia messed with his hair before leaning in to hug him. You know that more than a lot of teachers I've met. I think you've just been so sidetracked that you've forgotten that you know it. She's at Soche. Even if she doesn't want to be in a technical school, it's still a good one. He shrugged, mulling over her words and trying to pass things separately. She's a good student when she isn't trying to kill me. What's she got to be defensive about? I know you're scared, but think about her for a moment. Leia held on to him. Maybe we can find a solution somehow, since you're determined to do this. Tom grimaced, but tried to set the situation aside. Personal wasn't the same as important. It wasn't like Zinshiki hadn't been forthcoming about what she wanted and why. She's afraid of losing what I take for granted. She's socially isolated. I suppose that's because she's so young and I'm an honored elder. Leia mussed his hair and hugged him a little tighter. I was going to say more secure, he groused, but it was hard to put much feeling behind it. You're sure you're going through with this plan tomorrow? Leia's voice took on a pensive tone. This is serious. I should come with you. We could still call the authorities. No. I have to go through this on my own. All of it. He shook his head and sighed, leaning into her. Sham help me. Della didn't so much as open her eyes. And that's why you'll be a good son-in-law. The autocab ride was uneventful. Getting out was another matter, though he made it halfway to the front door before the Shorvanti began to stare. He nearly made it to his classroom when Vemi Rassani's voice came bellowing up the hall, Professor Warwick, what in the name of the Empress are you doing? It should have taken a lot of calm to overlook the crowd of stunned students in the hallway. It didn't. Despite the situation, he felt utterly serene. Really? Who cared? Who cared? And why should he? If he was lucky, there'd be a man-eating alien coming to dinner tonight. Anything else threatened to be surreal. Suck it up, kids, and pay attention. Someday you're all going to look ridiculous. The trick is not minding too much while it's happening. Counting under his breath, he fixed a smile on his face and gave it a few seconds before turning to sing out, "Good morning, Head Administrator." To be fair, she nearly tripped over her own feet, but it was a nice recovery. Tom shrugged off his jacket. It had been frigid outside, but inside the building it was warm as the shield liked, which left it comfortably on the warm side for him. Even with nothing on but a pair of sneakers, short shorts, with a thin purple shawl covering the pasties stuck on his chest. "Do you like it? I'm starting my ceremonial wedding preparations today, and it's an important religious observance." He turned to the side and toyed with the scarf, while she sputtered and turned bright blue. Sort of a mixed ceremony, but I was so inspired when you told me Sochi embraces cultural diversity that I thought I'd come in and share. I know it's a tad revealing, but I'm still fully covered, and you must have at least a few other Shamantal worshippers here in the student body. The faculty, the school board. Tom looked up at her, and his smile grew a bit more toothsome. "I know I'll be speaking to Rebecca early on about this experience. Personally." "The Minister of Education?" Rasani still looked apoplectic, but she was starting to recover a sense of outrage. "And just how would you know her?" "I met her at the convocation, the one where you and Garnier Sassanio were getting along so famously. Very fine woman." Tom nodded as he held up his Omnipad. "I have her on speed dial. I could call her now if you like." "Call her?" "Don't mind if I do." Tom drew in a deep breath, arching his chest just a bit. One of the students might have squeaked. "I could call her right now, or I could finish my class and go. After all, I have my wedding ceremony to start this evening, so I expect after one more hour you'll never see me again. I suppose it's up to you. So, what will it be?" The morning air was crisp, but Peli Se'eth had bundled up tight. Some people actually liked fall, but she wasn't one of them. The mid-50s were bad enough, but it was into the 40s this morning. It was building toward a cold and miserable winter, and she hurried inside. The warm air inside hit her, and she breathed a sigh of relief, gratefully opening her coat to shake off the cold. She usually was the first one in the office, getting things ready before the head administrator arrived. It was a good job, one she intended to keep until Garnier retired. Despite their differences in station, they made a good team. They'd been through so much together. She smiled as she stepped inside the office, ready to start the day. A dozen girls lay sleeping on the floor, sprawled in front of Garnier's office. Tom checked his Omnipad. Vadim was right on time and would be here any moment. There was nothing planned for the class. He'd run through the meager material Professor Borai left him days ago. She'd probably wanted to give him time to meet the students. He should send a thank you. Assuming he got out of this alive. Sitting in a classroom full of nervous teenagers, Tom had to admit that, as master plans went, it left a lot to be desired. The damn pasties felt ridiculous. That alone should condemn Shamantal worship. What guy in his right mind, Shilvanti or otherwise, would do this as formal wear? Alright, it was more comfortable than a necktie, but the humiliation factor. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was supposed to put you in some sort of introspective mood, symbolic of something deeply significant. The feeling of sham watching over you. The feeling of sharing and community with barriers. What a load of crap. It would have been worth it under different circumstances. Hell, he'd have stuck tassels on his chest just to give Femi Rasani a stroke. Now, well, the girls were dumbstruck, but Zinshiki was still looking entirely too keen. So, Helmia, I am dressed appropriately today. Tom watched the girl turn 2 interesting shades of blue.
Yes, Professor.
She stewed a little bit, twisting on one foot. Could you tell us how you're going to marry? You said it will be a mixed ceremony. Oh, you ever heard that? Gods bless the girl. He'd feared he was going to have to trick someone into asking. Certainly, it's going to be a Shivanti ceremony later on, but an Earth wedding this shell, there's not much to it. We just have to jump over a broom.
A broom?
Confusion washed over her features, but at least she was no longer looking quite so embarrassed. It made him feel a little better inside. In fairness, tricking the others was all for Zinshiki's benefit. She had to believe in the wedding. That, after tomorrow, he was going to disappear forever. Ridiculous or not, this had to look convincing. I know it sounds odd, but not all that long ago, humans used to jump over a fire. Tom waited for the looks of confusion to pass before he pressed on, working through the explanation. It's a very old tradition. Humans would light a bonfire to celebrate the coming of spring or summer, and when the fire burned low enough, some of them would jump over it. The more people who jumped, the better that year's crop would be. That got a few grins and a giggle. The usual primitive traditions played well with the Shivanti until they got to know you. It was a galling process at times, but today it had to be done. A lot of times the fire had to be kindled by the most recently married couple, and when a boy and a girl lit the fire together, that was a wedding. He gave the girls a few seconds to think it over. Some of the grins turned thoughtful. Just as well, this was the part he had to sell. It wasn't always the ashes of a fire, either. Couples could also marry by jumping a sword or jumping over a broomstick laid on the ground. A very handy tradition when there wasn't a priest around. He gave that a moment to sink in. Since the nearest human priest is probably several thousand light years away, I think that qualifies. So, tonight I go into seclusion at human food, perform a private ritual, and tomorrow we jump over the broom and we're married. And you can't trace a thing with that either. He gave them a warm smile and clapped his hands. Now, as a thank you for a very interesting week, I have an extra surprise for you. It was going to be good to get back home. The Academy girls would have called him out on a statement like that, instead of turning blue in fearful apprehension. He'd trade jokes about it with Desi at the library, chat with them over a game of chess. The students here were nice, but it had only been a week. Enough time to get acquainted, not enough time to break down barriers. Only enough to get murdered and serve my giblets on a platter. It had been a mixed experience. Truth be told, he wanted to go home to the academy. He'd been pissed off ever since the other night with Vemi Rasani. Giving her a piece of his mind would have been a lot more satisfying if there'd been a prayer of her paying attention. That had a snowball's chance in. There was a knock at the classroom door, and he leapt off the desk to open the door with a flourish. Ladies, please say hello to Vadim. He's taken some time off from his work at Human Food to bring you a special treat. There was a small strangle sound beside him as Vadim stepped in and saw him. The boy was in on the plan, and growing up with Badin had to dull the senses. But there was hearing, and then there was seeing. Tom gently ushered the boy inside before he could balk. Vadim and his father are good friends, and they're catering my wedding. Anyway, as a special thank you, I asked him to bring us lunch. A wedding feast, and my family recipe for many generations. Fried chicken. Vadim was looking rather snappier these days, and he'd given up the black slacks and shirt that made him look like a goth. Melondi was definitely having a good effect on the boy, and the girls in the classroom were already cooing over him as he moved from table to table, working them like a charm. The generations comment made Zinshiki take notice. Go figure. It was all going to plan. The untraceable ceremony, the wedding feast, even the stupid pasties. No one in their right mind would dress like this in winter if they weren't serious about getting married. The girls clearly believed it. He looked over at Zinshiki and smiled. He was rewarded by watching her ears draw back while she tore into a chicken breast savagely. Experience and treachery for the win. Score 1 for Team Human. Pelly closed Ganya's door behind her.
If you don't mind my asking, you aren't angry?
After an hour's chat, the girls had gone back to their dorms. Despite her expectations, Ganya seemed to be in good spirits. Almost jovial.
If all of our problems went away within an hour, I would be a happy woman,
Ganya said serenely, waving her glass of Abeki juice vaguely at the window as she looked out over the campus.
I suppose, but it was a shock finding them here. The ladies were quite adamant about not being moved.
She canted her head.
However did you manage it?
Pelly, expanding the minds of our students can be an exacting effort, sometimes fraught with unusual, even unexpected results. Professor Warwick has shown us something new, but by talking to the girls and hearing their point of view, we gave this situation the attention it deserved, without making it into something it is not. Now, as to the other part of the problem, where is Professor Borai?
Just outside, Professor. She's quite upset.
Pelly sniffed dismissively.
She was giving young Miss Desi the most frightful looks, and she tried to have a go at Miss Chuksa.
She isn't entirely dim, then. While I have no doubt Miver will be unbiased towards her adopted daughter, there are limits. Ganya mused over the scene a moment, wishing she could have been there. Besides, I expect she fared poorly against young Jacksme.
I should say so.
A ghost of a smile passed over Pelly, though it was inappropriate for students to act like that to the faculty.
Miss Chuksa certainly knows her own mind.
I should say so as well, Ganya echoed.
Very well, please send her in.
Ganya watched Pelly as she extended the invitation. Borai shoved past. Head Administrator, I am done here.
Professor Borai, on that we are in agreement.
Ganya arched an eyebrow at the graceless intrusion into her domain. The academy was her empire, and the office was her court. Borai had created a disturbance, and while the students had found an unconventional answer, it was a disturbance nonetheless.
I trust you've had an interesting experience this week.
Interesting? Your students are totally disruptive. They questioned me. Not just to get more information either. I mean, they questioned me.
Yes, it's a rather novel technique, but one I'm growing partial to.
Ganya stood behind her desk, rather than offing her fist.
I've just spent an intriguing hour with your students, and I must say they've quickly developed a capacity for the analysis of complex social relationships.
They walked out on me.
Precisely.
Ganya canted her head, slowly.
Might you take out your omnipad?
What?
Was I unclear? Your omnipad. Take it out for me, please.
Ganya drew the words out, as if she was speaking to a particularly slow child or difficult parent.
Very good. Now, I suggest you call Administrator Rasani. While the two of you may work together wonderfully, you can tell her I have serious doubts about your future in education. Good day.
Zinshiki hid her claws under the desk. She wanted to snarl so badly that she forced herself to sit on her Asaiak. It was uncomfortable enough on a chair never made to accommodate one, and sitting on her Asaiak bordered on the painful. At least she didn't show more than a hint of fang. It was so utterly frustrating. Leaving aside the humiliation of two missed attempts, Warwick was not behaving the way Prey should. He'd even saved her life from drowning. Who did such a thing? Moreover, he defended the honour of her name twice. Once on the first day, and again last night with the head administrator. A whole crowd had borne witness, including her birth mother. That was difficult enough to explain on the ride home, but now this taunting her by the flagrant sharing of food. How dare he? A hunter's job was to provide food for the warband. You did not just give it away. He was creating a debt she'd have to honour once she ate him. Zinchiki sat down more firmly on her Asaiak and grimaced, wrestling back another snarl. Dark Mother, if I wasn't so proud of hunting him, I swear I'd have to kill him out of sheer irritation. At least now she knew where to hunt him. She would make the kill before his wedding. That was only respectful. He would be alone, in seclusion. She would take him tonight at this human food. She bit into the chicken ferociously and scowled. Bad enough that she'd been craving more of it nightly. Now she wouldn't have the time to find out the combination of herbs and spices. Human would surely taste wonderful this way. After asking Leia to call Miv, Tom set down his omnipad and looked around the empty restaurant. Human food had gained a substantial following, and seeing it empty felt odd. There was an air of expectation, as if the room was waiting for customers to arrive. Straining to come to life, with Berdine throwing some gloriously extravagant fit, and Vadim quietly taking care of business. Not tonight. Tonight the tables and chairs had been cleared away, leaving only one, carefully set at the back of the room beside the kitchen door. He left her nowhere to hide. The ventilation ducts were too small. The bathrooms had been cleared. Berdine had the staff go through every nook and cranny after locking the doors, and they cleared out the back, leaving Tom to lock up behind them. This was going to be an expensive favour. Berdine had been going through everything he could find on human recipes, and had run into a roadblock only Tom could help with. Something so obscure only his data files had the recipe. Admittedly, Berdine was a genius. His willingness to explore avant-garde combinations had won him several awards as a chef, but his trial-by-error technique, mixing human and shill food, had produced some ghastly results. While the Turox burger was a hit, there was also the durian fruit curry, lasagna with pickles, fried lard balls, the chocolate frosted ham with anchovies. Fortunately, they now only lived in his nightmares. But now, Berdine was dead set on learning to make garum. The mind boggled. It was like handing a nuclear weapon to a toddler. He'd have to set some boundaries, but that was a problem for later. Closing the restaurant tonight was a costly favour, but his life depended on it. This needed to happen. Slipping out of the kitchen with his dinner, he sighed and looked around the lobby. The place really did look authentic now. A taste of home. In hindsight, the redecoration had been a godsend. He hoped it would be a lifesaver. He set up some music for the dining room and Cheeseburger in Paradise was playing overhead. He glanced at the cord beside the table. It might be his only chance. He lay his cane down and eyed the fried chicken. His favourite meal might be his last. He would sit there, eat his dinner, and do... what? Something that looked contemplative, ceremonial, some complicated human wedding ritual? And how long would he have to stay awake before she made her move? He'd done everything he could to lure her into night. Hell, the sign said it all. Human food. He took a careful look outside and unlocked the front door. By the time dusk began to fall, Shinshiki had carefully circled the building twice. Security cameras kept watch over the front and back doors, but the sides of the building were clean. Warwick was clearly visible through the window. She watched him through the scope, as he picked at a large bucket of chicken. Her stomach rumbled in anticipation, but she was patient. Warwick began to bob his head before he rose, and moved around the table to some unknowable rhythm. Doubtless, it was all a part of his wedding ritual. She waited, biding her time. There were no other signs of life. No one had emerged from the kitchen. The lot was empty. He was alone in the restaurant. Still, she watched. When she judged it was dark enough, she pocketed the scope, let her eyes readjust, and then she moved. Shinshiki was swift, and the steel grey of her pelt melted into the shadows. She slipped around an intervening building in moments, raced towards the side of the building, gathered herself, and leapt. Her claws caught the top of the building, and she pulled herself up without a sound. Crouching low, she surveyed her surroundings before stalking toward the back. Leaning carefully over the edge, it was a moment's work with the spray can to blind the camera. She paused and listened. If anyone were laying in wait, surely they might move now. There was nothing. She crept towards the front of the building, carefully. Warwick was just beneath her, and she allowed no sound to betray her presence. The beating of her racing heart was bad enough. Soon, she would have her name. It would be a quick death. She would heed Raikishi's advice and take him in a rush. A blow to the neck with the fighting koshes looped at her wrists. A snapped neck and a bloodless kill to minimize evidence when she took his body away. But if he proved difficult, she would tear out his throat without hesitation. She leaned over the building and blinded the other camera. Her nerves made her want to rush, but she forced herself to stay calm. She vaulted down effortlessly, flung open the door, and screamed as she charged, "Chihuahua!" Philosophically, Tom's life had evolved towards Taoism. It had been a natural progression that opened him to working with the flow of events, even when they moved like wild rapids. It all came down to the expense of energy. You could try to carry buckets of water uphill, and you spend your life exhausted by the constant expense of energy. But water flowed downhill. You didn't have to fight it. The water arrived on its own, naturally. The world just worked better that way. While it wasn't a guarantee of success, it helped, and it certainly cut down on life's frustrations. It was all about working with the tools life handed you, rather than what you wished for. Of course, there was still no guarantee that the universe wouldn't just screw with you. He was far, far from Earth. While the Academy was home these days, Shill was largely a mystery. That left only two options where he could face this problem. The Academy, where everything would surely get out of his control, and right here at Human Food, where he had a chance to deal with things himself. Still, dinner was over, and the coffee wasn't helping now. Even with the prospect of a gruesome death to focus the mind, he was getting tired. Thankfully, Jimmy Buffett had come to the rescue. He wouldn't have called himself graceful. He managed when performing a kata, but dancing was never in his skill set. It didn't matter. He needed awake, not graceful, and shuffling along singing at the top of his lungs was keeping him going. He was ready. He was awake. His hand was on the cord. It almost wasn't enough. "They say that you're a snow queen," Honey, I don't think that's true. So why don't we get drunk and cheer-ow-wow? Fuck! He almost had a heart attack on the spot. Even if the Pejrin evolved thousands of light years from Earth, the scream was primal. It reached right down the spine like a banshee's shriek. A hunter staring at the tall grass on the savannah would have known it implicitly, and despite having a plan, his brain took a split second to decide between fight or flight. Zinshiki was already pelting across the dining room as he yanked on the cord. It would be more accurate to say Jimmy Buffett saved him twice. For some reason, he stuck the original Cheeseburger in Paradise restaurant in Indianapolis, and while the acoustics had sucked and the location was worse, it had offered a damn good burger while it lasted. The decor had stuck in the back of his mind when he nudged Burdine to redecorate human food into something more authentic, including the fishing net hung from the ceiling. Freezing up cost him precious moments, and she was faster than he'd expected. Even so, she was racing against gravity as netting laden with assorted human odds and ends came crashing down around her. She still nearly made it. As the tangled mess finally fell to a stop, Tom grabbed his cane and managed a frenzied body slam on top of a load of netting, flotsam, and 130-odd pounds of struggling catgirl. Shoving himself upright, he had just long enough to be grateful a life preserver got in the way as she clawed at the assorted memorabilia. The room was filled with the sounds of his struggle, her shrieks of anger, while somewhere in the tangle, a copy of Billy the Brass started singing, "Don't worry, be happy." "Right! I've had enough of this shit!" He gave it his best effort, and it was a good yell. It had depth, resonance, and a commanding tone, which made it a shame when she ignored him completely and tried chewing her way out. If it had been an old string net from Earth, she might have pulled it off. Whatever else you could say about the Shovanti, they took their fishing seriously. The cords weren't giving. She tried thrashing violently underneath him, but he managed to pin one of her arms under his knee. At least this had gone to plan. The difficult part wasn't getting the tiger by the tail. The difficult part was what happened when you let go. "Pay attention," he said, panting with a rush of adrenaline. "I am not your fucking prey. You're mine. Now give it up." The moment's hesitation was all she needed. Emerald eyes fastened on him, and she screamed again in fury, snarling something in Pejrin before switching to Vatica. "Never! Your liver will be mine!" It was a good threat. Even wrapped up tight in a fishing net, there was no doubt she was absolutely sincere. So was he. There were no good options. It wasn't personal, but the girl wanted him dead on a platter, and he had no intention of obliging. He could hate himself later. He reared back and brought the cane down hard. "Bad kitty!" The yell came out in English as he lashed out, as Brain struggled to reconnect to Vatica. The blows weren't gentle, and he brought the cane down savagely before her screaming turned from curses to pain as he held back. "Do you yield, or—" The offer was cut short, as the claws on Zinshiki's free hand sunk into his calf. Searing pain ran up his leg as she snouted him through the net. Tom thumbed the catch on his cane, yanked out the blade, and thrust it down. Zinshiki's snarled intentions abruptly turned into a ululating yowl of pain. "Do I have your attention now?" he snarled, yanking the saw cane out of her shoulder. Thick blood, black as molasses, dripped from the steel as he brought it to her throat. "Because I really want you to get the fucking point." Despite the snarling fangs and claws trying to rake his legs, he had the situation under control. For now. He had her pinned. He had a weapon. He didn't want to kill her, but he still had no idea how to let go of the tiger, and she wasn't having it.
You'll have to kill me first. I will... Enough!
Now that was a good scream. It filled the room. With better acoustics, it would have echoed. It also wasn't his. Tom's head snapped up and his heart might have skipped a beat. A mixed collection of nearly a dozen Pejrim were watching him intently. Mariquette was there among them, and she stepped to the edge of the net with a lethal grace.
Kriab, Huyashefri, Sinshiki. No, I have him. I will get free and...
I will kill her first, Tom said flatly, making his words count. He raised the sword to let them see the ebon blood, before pushing the tip to her neck again. The time for letting go of the tiger was coming, one way or the other. Maybe now, maybe her birth mother will see sense, force them to end this. He had to look and control, take away their option for anything else. She will die as my prey, damn it. And no, I will not eat her. That got their attention. Tails thrashed, ears flattened. Fangs were fully bared in rictus snarls, as the woman spat and hissed at each other in Pezrin. A few of them threw their heads back with a long wailing howl. Of course, I may have just fucked up. Mariquette snarled something at the Pezrin behind her, before looking towards her daughter.
You would dishonor her so?
I don't want to dishonor anyone, but these are your traditions, not mine. Tom took a deep breath. All this over my ancestor's name? Well, guess what? She can have it, with my blessing. I'll give it to her. How about that? But she is not going to murder me. I am not joining the Quiet Invisible just so she can become an adult and get laid.
You have her at your mercy.
Mariquette's ears rose, but her amber eyes regarded him through slits.
You also seem sincere. You would give her your name as a Praf Hakakt?
A what? Be very careful, buddy. They're pissed. It was a slim blessing that Zinshiki had stopped struggling. She still looked like she wanted to claw his eyes out, but he'd take what he could get. Still, he was the one holding the sword. Look, I've done my best to figure this out without pissing you off, but you're on my turf now. So, as a courtesy, would you please explain that in Vatica, so I can give you the right answer?
That is not unreasonable.
Mariquette seemed to regard him, even if the woman behind her didn't relax.
The concept does not translate well into Vatica. To be a Praf Hakakt is to adopt one and give them your name. It is usually done with the path of service, but you are a hunter and you hold her life in your hands now. You have the right to choose.
Okay. He mulled that over to make sure he wasn't missing anything. If there was some way he could just donate the name, now, then that would work. Not out of the woods yet. Besides... Tom sighed, glancing down at the green eyes glaring up at him from the floor. He knew he might regret asking, and what does she think about this?
Tabik soft jaw?
Zinshiki snarled, and started to thrash underneath him.
Sak hayo? Ach beth en tahif yar? Jatib, Isek, Gebik Huchije, Ekpo, Rom Oyebinak Womari ul Blick!
Mariquette roared down at the massive squirming netting. She turned back to Tom, taking hold of her tail and grooming it idly.
She says yes.
Yeah, I can tell she's just thrilled. So, by adopt, you mean...
She will become your telect, your name-taker. Daughter is the nearest word in Vatica. Provisionally an adult, she is yours in all things until you die. And she takes your name, or she does.
Marraket set her hands on her hips like she was explaining the obvious, but her ears rose. You would do this for her? It has never happened with an alien before. Don't move, don't talk. Don't say no because they're already pissed off. Just think. Oh. Scraps of information floated through his mind as his brain tried to wrap his mind about the situation. It still wasn't enough to go on, but the looks on their faces said it all. Alright. You're in Indiana Tom and the Temple of Doom. Say the wrong thing to these women, and they'll be writing "You chose poorly" on my tombstone. Burdine will be sponging me off the walls. And it made sense. Weird alien sense, but no worse than the Chavanti. Really, it did. They were spitting mad. Literally. The whole kill and not eat her thing was probably a deadly insult. If he refused her as unworthy now... And this means she doesn't kill and eat me. He made it a statement. It felt like a question. She must guard your life and learn your wisdom as a hunter. Marraket showed a hint of fangs. When you die, she will eat you and take your name. So I'm an organ donor with benefits. He chewed it over. That sounded mostly harmless. It certainly beat the alternative of imminent death. And who was he going to give a kidney to out here anyway? What about her duties to your warband? When a Prafakakt is chosen from outside the warband, the one chosen as Talakt joins the Prafakakt's family. Zinshiki will go with you. That is the way of things. Marraket shrugged and looked at him intently. If you simply let her free, she will kill you. She just can't eat you. Great. Don't want to soften that up a little? Marraket raised her head as she regarded him. Would you prefer I lie? Yeah, no. So, parenthood or certain death? What's the worst that could happen? After clearing up the worst of the mess, the cab ride home turned disarmingly calm after he hung up the call to Miv and Leia. It was all going to take some explaining. More explaining. It might help if he figured it out himself, though Zinshiki had given up conversation in favor of glaring balefully at him. He shifted, awkwardly, trying to get comfortable. You appear to be in pain, she said, leaning back into the corner of the cab and regarding him. He sighed. It was better than nothing. Yes, a bit. I think pinning you down tore a stitch in my wound and you clawed my leg. Her ears flickered as she leaned forward. Will it be fatal? No, it will not be fatal. Tom bit down on the irritation and tried to make the most of it. Humans appear to be one of the more durable species in the galaxy, and I don't plan on going anywhere soon, if it's all the same to you. Anyway, you lost fair and square. Doesn't your honor code have something about not sulking? She settled back into the corner of the cab, as far away from him as possible. You had a net, and you wanted to eat me. Not my problem if you didn't scout things out. He shrugged in the darkness and got the impression she saw him perfectly. War is an act of will aimed at a living entity that reacts. This is some of your human wisdom, she asked after a moment. I suppose it is. As a meeting of minds, this was going to take some getting used to. Clausewitz, one of our very best. You had a long claw hidden in your cane. Was this an improvement? At least she was talking, and he shrugged again. Again, not my problem. You saw me carrying it all week long. More time passed, as the miles rolled by in the dark. He watched her watching him. He could be patient too, and at least it was good to know she was curious. In the end, she blinked first. Literally. Why are you doing this for me?
giving me your name." Zinshiki blinked slowly, in a way that certainly meant something to a Pezrin, before crossing her arms in a way that needed no translation. "You know I wish to kill you. Now I'm forced to stay by your side to make sure no one eats you but me. If we weren't surrounded by Shorvanti, I'd think you were extremely cruel."
"I asked your warband to bandage you." It seemed like an olive branch to offer, under the circumstances. At least they had some handy.
"We carry them, in case there was an accident deboning you," Zinshiki said flatly, but she did unbend a fraction. "You did an honorable thing by sharing food with them."
There was a lot of extra chicken. Seemed ashamed to let it go to waste.
"That is why it was honorable. You forged a bond with their warband."
Well, now it was their warband, not her warband. This was going to take some thought, or things would get ahead of him. He had a daughter now, one he knew almost nothing about, who tried taking a chunk out of his leg less than an hour ago. But that was last hour's problem. At least there would be a next hour's problem. A daughter. Another daughter.
"Why did you have a plastic singing fish mounted as a hunting trophy?"
It was going to be a long trip. Marin sulked in her chair, pensively, and drew her arms around her with a scowl.
"I swear by the goddess, in spite of my oath, if they ask it again, I will do violence."
Sam regarded her quietly as they sat in the lounge. The Necessity wasn't a large ship, but after all the modifications, it was now a fast and comfortable one, far from what her designers laid down. The engine upgrades made her faster than most racing yachts, and while she wasn't in the same league as an Imperial courier, she was as close as her overall mass allowed. She was a fast ship, just not fast enough. Taking another pull from his glass of scotch, he settled into the couch a bit more comfortably. Sammy is just excited to get there.
"They could go poke at the engines some more," Marin grumbled. "I love them, but I swear by the goddess, just one more time. I told you Sammy would get bored too."
He looked her over, the new eyes picking out rich details that he still worked to process. It was fun. Besides, it's the longest they've been out of a lab or didn't have a problem to work on.
"I gave them a copy of the twin prime paradox when we started. It's baffled scientists for ages, and they solved it in 2 days."
Marin shook her head and continued to scowl.
"We still have 3 days left before we drop into normal space. You have to keep them busy. Off the bridge. Something. I just don't want to hear it again."
"It still needs peer review," Sam offered lamely, enduring the withering glare as the scotch ran down his throat and burned pleasantly. Offering up a sheepish grin, he shrugged. "I warned you that you wouldn't like them when they're bored, but we're all a little bored. Even with only the 4 of us, it's only a small ship, and..." Over the last few days, Sammy had taken to wearing just a set of emerald green rabbit pajamas that matched their eyes. They burst into the lounge, ears flapping wildly, and threw up their hands.
"Are we there yet?"
It was going to be a very long trip indeed.